So last Sunday, those of you who gathered with us, even in the rain, in the shelter at Lions Park, last Sunday during our Vision Day, our Rally Day, I reflected on the future of spirituality. That is, thinking about what kind of world is our spirituality actually creating, in service of, and what kind of spirituality can actually help to heal and liberate and transform our world into the one that God dreams of. And while many of us have been raised to believe that religion, or Christianity in particular, is about being a good person or a kind person, or it's about forgiveness of sin, or loving your neighbor, or going to heaven, at the center of the spirituality to which I believe Jesus calls us is the pursuit of aliveness. I have come that they may have life and have it abundantly, Jesus says in the Gospel of John. And I believe everything else is meant to be a response to this question, that we don't merely love because Jesus said, love one another, but because love is necessary if one is to pursue this aliveness. That we don't forgive just because we think we have to in order to be a good person, but because there is something in the process of forgiveness that is necessary to the pursuit of aliveness for ourselves and as a society. That we don't love our enemies because we think it will benefit us, but because being committed to and honoring the dignity of all people is necessary for human community to move toward greater freedom and aliveness. And so through everything in life, we keep circling around this question: what does it mean to be, or to move toward being, more fully, feelingly human and alive? And then, of course, that generates all kinds of follow-up questions. How does that pursuit call me to live in this moment, right? In response to this conflict, or this person, or this situation, or this issue right here, right now? How does it shape the way that we structure the world, what we do with our resources? Is what we're doing moving us and our wider world toward greater aliveness, or not? And I say all this again, and I'll continue to say it throughout the coming weeks ahead of us, because to be honest, I think much of the individualistic self-help spirituality that our world tries to sell us, that too many churches peddle in, that they don't actually facilitate this journey toward true life, but they rather encourage a form of what's come to be known as spiritual bypassing. Has anyone heard this term before, spiritual bypassing? No? Okay, good. Well, let me introduce you to it. Before I do, though, let me ask you a few questions. How many of you have heard or said to someone else, or perhaps thought, in response to anger, anger never accomplishes anything. Hey, you just got to let it go and move on. Hey, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. Or when someone has been wronged, hey, that's just the way they are. Why do you let it get you so upset? Hey, you just got to forgive and forget. Just move on. There's no point in dwelling on the past. Or this is just my cross to bear. Or how many of you have felt as though you must be a boundless embodiment of compassion, which means endlessly pouring yourself out for others without anyone pouring back into you, even when you have nothing left to give? That to set a boundary and say, honestly, I can't. Nope, I'm done. That to do that, to honor one's own needs, is selfish. Right? There's this pervasive sense in our culture and in our churches, I think as well, that to be upset, to be angry, to set a boundary, to struggle with forgiveness makes you unloving, which is then equated with being less spiritual. And how many of us in response to grief or loss or death have said or have had someone say to us, hey, again, no use dwelling in the past, just got to keep moving. Well, at least it's nothing compared to what so-and-so is going through. Glad I'm not them. Or, again, it must be God's will. I'm suffering so that God can teach me a lesson. In his book, Spiritual Bypassing, When Spirituality Disconnects Us from What Really Matters, Robert Masters explains that spiritual bypassing is the use of spiritual beliefs to avoid dealing with painful feelings or with unresolved wounds or with developmental needs. Right? It's the process of using spirituality, spiritual language to rise above human emotions, especially those ones that we really don't like and don't want to feel. Right? Like anger and grief, like jealousy, like shame. That to be spiritual is simply to never feel such things, these lower things. Honestly, which in our society we feminize. Women have those things, right? Not stoic men, not stoic, higher spiritual people. One who is angry or grieving for a long time or depressed or setting a boundary, that they are less spiritual. Shouldn't they just get over it by now? Clearly they aren't trusting God, right? They don't have enough faith, I guess. Right? Spiritual bypassing is using spiritual tools like meditation or prayer or spiritual beliefs like love and forgiveness as a way to avoid, to bypass, to go around a significant amount of what it means to be human, rather than as a pathway through the messiness of what it means to be human. It is to focus, perhaps, always on other people's problems, to be drawn into their crises, to be always available to help them while failing to actually address one's own needs, one's own stuff, right? It is to think that church or worship is meant to be an epidural, right? That having faith is meant to take the pain away. It's about escaping the hard stuff in life rather than helping us to face it and move through it. Spiritual bypassing is the mask, the persona that we wear to convince ourselves and others that it's all good. It's the toxic positivity culture that makes us think that, you know what, just gotta stay positive, just look on the bright side. That is, it's a refusal to be honest with ourselves and with others about how we're really doing. To admit that things, actually, they're not okay. But rather, we repress this in order to present ourselves with that fake plastic smile, right? It's all good. It's the voice that only knows how to respond to hard things with, oh, just let it go, just let it go, just let it go. It's the voice that says, okay, I know I'm supposed to be loving, so I'm going to repress or feel ashamed about these feelings of jealousy or envy or anger. That says, okay, forgiveness is the spiritual thing to do, so I'm going to repress this hurt those words or actions caused me. That I have to be compassionate. Okay, I have to be compassionate and to offer sacrificial love. That's what my faith tells me, so I'm going to be pulled again into everyone else's crises, even when I have nothing left to give. After all, love is kind, as Paul says. It isn't rude. So I'm also going to stay silent and remain a bystander on the sidelines rather than speak up against injustice, because that'll make people uncomfortable. And that's kind of rude, isn't it? To make people uncomfortable. Such spirituality, it takes Paul's list for instance, of the fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control, as encouragement to repress one's feelings, to cut oneself off from the things that are not those, the things that make us uncomfortable or make others uncomfortable. As if the way to produce such fruit in our lives is to simply banish them into the shadows. And for a long time, religion and even secular forms of self-help have not only made us feel ashamed of being fully human, of feeling this full spectrum of the emotional life, what it means to be human and alive, but then religion has also insisted that the right way, the good way, the enlightened way, the way that will get you to heaven is to simply not feel or experience such things. Those are bad. They set you on the pathway to hell. Avoid at all costs. Right? Just get back to work. Just keep your head down. Just keep moving. Friends, there is no human being alive. I don't care how enlightened you are. I don't care if you're the Dalai Lama. There is no human being who is above their humanity. Not even Jesus. You see, to be human, as Jesus was human, is to inevitably feel such things. They don't make you bad. They are not to be avoided at all costs. They make you human. And if we cannot be fully, feelingly alive, if we cut ourselves off from these things, then we cannot follow Jesus. Now, I won't ask those of you who are out there who have engaged in any of these forms of spiritual bypassing to raise your hands, because I would expect to see all of your hands up. Because the truth is, I would have to raise my hand too, right? I too have my own stories of struggling with this in the everydayness of life, of thinking that to say no to someone is unkind, that to set that boundary was unloving, that my faith told me I had to allow it, even in those situations where in reality it turns out it was a betrayal of my own self. Or that I have to be the man on a white horse with no needs in service of others, constantly giving, never in touch with any of those other emotions except for anger, perhaps, when it comes out sideways. That I have to do this even when it diminishes the aliveness within me. See, such spirituality is inauthentic because it's used to bypass being human. And so it's incapable of moving us toward greater aliveness. But even more than just our own individual, personal spiritual journeys toward aliveness, I believe that these mentalities are also at the root of our world's movement toward mass destruction. Because when we are spiritually bypassing, instead of reflecting on what we are not willing to face in ourselves in that moment, what we don't like about ourselves, we end up putting on to others. I don't like that I'm angry or sad or afraid or unable to set a boundary. Oh, and I know these all too intimately. Perhaps it scares me. But because I don't like the way that it makes me feel and I feel like I can't do them, I don't like the way it makes me feel. Because I refuse to face it and admit it and reflect on it to move through it, I inevitably end up putting that onto others, so that when they are sad, when they are afraid, when they are angry, when they set a boundary, I think, well, who gave you the right to do that? How dare you? I can't deal with it, so I either shut you down or I distance myself from you. Or I tell you, you're not being very loving right now. I moralize it, right? make them feel bad again for being angry or upset. I tell them they're too crazy or sensitive. I do anything but affirm what they're feeling. Because to affirm what they're feeling means that I would also have to face that and affirm it for myself. And that's hard. See, our ability, that work to make room for, our inability to make room for another's grief or fear or anger, is really an indication of our own inability to make space for it within ourselves. Our judgment of others, how critical we are of others, usually is an indication of the thing that we are already doing to ourselves. In shutting down our own and others' so-called negative experiences or emotions, we miss out on the opportunity to become more whole, on the ability to actually know true life, to experience that fuller sense of what it means to be human and alive. And the irony is that to move our world toward greater aliveness, it begins not merely by gritting our teeth and loving and serving others while denying our own humanity, our own needs. It begins by facing those parts of ourselves that we see as unloving, that we see as bad, that we hate, that we wish weren't there, that we are ashamed of, those parts of ourselves that we judge, that we know are there, but we cannot admit to ourselves, say it out loud. It's learning to face those things and to hold them with compassion. And faith or trust in God is that reminder that when we can't, God does. When we cannot do that for ourselves, muster it for ourselves, we can rest in the fact that God does. When we end up bringing more love and compassion for ourselves, we end up being able to extend more love and compassion to others, to be able to make more space for it with and for others, to love their unlovable parts. That's why I've come to believe that all authentic spirituality is a movement toward true aliveness. Not just living, but truly being alive. It's a response to the question of what do we do with all of these feelings and experiences? Does our response or our reaction, does it move us toward greater life, toward that which builds up and binds together, toward that which heals or repairs or restores, makes new, or does it move us toward that which disconnects and tears down, which builds resentment, that wounds, that destroys? See, passages like 1 Corinthians and Galatians 5 are not a list of things we just will ourselves to do. Like all fruit, they grow on the vines and branches of that which is planted in fertile soil, is well watered, is pruned, is given time. They are the product of intentional and sustained work, of learning and unlearning, deconstruction and reconstruction of regular practices and rituals and commitments. And so this fall, that's what I want to invite us into, is a season of framing our spiritual journeys, what we're doing here as a community, what we might seek to build together as a sort of school of life. That we would be a community where people can grapple honestly with what love looks like in different complicated situations? What does repair look like when we inevitably screw it up? A place where we refuse to settle for easy answers and half-truths, but grapple with the truth, question the truth in search of life. A place where we reflect honestly and authentically on the joys and the challenges of being human in this world that is both beautiful and brutal, where everything we would do would help us to intentionally move toward greater love and aliveness. That's what we're going to keep circling around. May God be with you, with all of us, on that journey.